Spectrovision Radio.
What if I was to tell you that 99.9% of our observable universe is made of a substance that most people don't know anything about and is rarely even spoken about? Now, how could this be? Almost 100% of the universe, including everything on Earth, is made of something that we don't focus on? I mean, why is that not the primary focus? Why are we talking about anything else? Great question. And we'll get into that in this video. So I'm glad you're here today, because if you watched my last episode where I interviewed Dana Kipple, the plasma girl, you know what I'm about to tell you. What this mysterious substance that makes up practically 100% of our universe is. And in fact, it is plasma. Scientists will say that it's the fourth state of matter, which is an insane thing to say given what I just told you. If it is something that constitutes practically 100% of our universe, why would it be called the fourth state of matter? Why is it so far down the ladder, and why is it rarely talked about? Well, because we exist inside an atomic world, what I call the simulator. And we view things from this angle out. So we exist in what they consider that 0.1% of the universe that is not free-flowing plasma. So if you think about the universe as an ocean, the ocean is plasma. And then there's a few little islands that poke out of the ocean. And those islands are what they call physical matter, the atomic world, like Earth. Okay, so where did those little anomalies come from? Because they are anomalies. We live inside of a very mysterious anomaly because we are in the 0.01% of the universe, which is pretty miraculous. Congratulations. We did it. We made the top 0.01%. So what is this world? How did it come to be? And what is out there? That's what we're going to talk about today. And not only are we going to talk about that, and I'm going to blow your mind along the way, but I'm also going to tell you a conclusion I came to through my research into plasma and why I think I might have found the actual location of the spirit world, which we talk about so much. And yes, it is plasma based. And yes, it is wild. So, let's get into it, my friends. Hello, friends, and welcome to another exciting episode of Conscious Observers. So the last episode, I went deep with Dana Kipple on plasma and consciousness and the new human potential, and it was a great episode. We covered a lot of things. I want to follow that up with my personal thoughts and give you a little presentation on plasma. From my point of view, I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to get into formulas and data too much. I like to look at everything through a philosophical lens. Ask why, zoom out and see patterns and structure in our universe and reality. So that's what we're going to do today, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully this shifts your perception on some stuff and just makes you think a little bigger, because that's all we're doing out here, guys. Beautiful day here in Florida. Thanks for being with me. I've been told by my wife to ask y'all to like and to share and to subscribe and do all those things. I never ask that, I never say that, but it helps, and we really are trying to grow this thing. Get these fun messages out there to the world. So any of that I would greatly appreciate. So let's dive in, guys. What is plasma? It's a key word right now because I think that the superconscious wants us to be talking about this, so they're dropping these seeds on everybody to be discussing. But what even is plasma? So from like a textbook point of view, plasma is essentially when atoms are stripped of their, electrons from the nucleus. So like in this atomic world, everything is very crystalline and structured and predictable. And atoms, they have the nucleus and they have the electrons that orbit, and, it's all very predictable, structured. And then when it gets heated up to an incredible temperature, those electrons are stripped away from the core, and they become free-flowing. And then that way it's sort of like they call it a soup, you know, because it's not structured. Like we'd like to look at the atomic world as like these little BBs, like billiard balls that build everything, even though that's not true at all. But that's how we like to look at it. And then plasma would be more free-flowing. So if you want to use a water analogy, plasma would be water, and then the atomic world would be ice. So it's the same substance, just a different form. And then we would be like an ice sculpture, right? Because we're sculpted. So even the word plasma, you know, comes from the Greek word to form and to mold. And that's why a lot of like ancient, you know, and esoteric teachings talk about the clay that life and reality and everything is formed from. Well, that clay is plasma. So if you look at the universe as a blank canvas of, you know, unrealized potential energy, it's just clay that's ready to be formed, ready to be realized, ready to be programmed. And that clay is plasma. In fact, so I said that plasma by definition is when the electron is stripped from the nucleus. Well, they like to tell us that the electron is like a little BB that, you know, flies kind of like a moon around the Earth, around the nucleus. But now with, you know, quantum physics, we understand that that's not what an electron is. An electron is actually a probability distribution field. It doesn't exist in one place. It exists in a superposition, all the places. And the electron is this cloud that orbits the nucleus, and that cloud is literally what's called a probability distribution field, which means that the electron can be in any one of those places at any time. And it's basically collapsed at a certain point, and then it has to pick a location. Okay, so if the electron is just a probability field, and plasma is essentially stripped, like electrons that have been stripped away from their core, stripped away from their center, from their nucleus. So it's just a sea of electrons. And electrons are probability distribution fields. You might see where I'm going with this. That would mean plasma is one gigantic collective probability distribution field, a field of probabilities, a field of potential, a field of energy that does not have any particular form or purpose or function or programming, that is a blank canvas that is ready and waiting to be formed. This is where the word plasma comes from, to form, to mold. It's the creative substrate for our entire universe. The blank canvas, how exciting is that? Okay. So then how does that blank canvas create form? Great question, my friend. You're full of these great questions today. How does this sea of potential energy, this sea of plasma, take form? It does so through plasma dust. So dust has to enter in, and dust is like little particles, microscopic particles, that start to give the plasma some form, some substance. So where does this dust come from? Well, we're told that the dust comes from things like comets and things that break apart in space, and just kind of, it's almost like natural space debris. And that does account for a lot of the dust out there, of course. And plasma is able to use this to give it sort of like rebarb, you know, to kind of give it structure, you know, and to give it some sort of a, you know, a solidity so that it can form. But something amazing happened at IBM when they were working on the plasma tokamak thing. And they had these like super duper controlled clean rooms where they were working with plasma. And they have to keep everything out of these clean rooms. I mean, every single dust particle, everything. I mean, super duper, like no static, no anything in these rooms. And they were getting frustrated because dust kept forming and appearing. And they're like, what's up with this dust? We've done everything we can to keep the dust out, and it keeps it forming. And what they found is that plasma itself, especially whenever it's introduced to UV light, creates its own dust. Wow, that's pretty interesting. So go back to the Big Bang, and scientists are in agreement that at the Big Bang, and we can argue all day long what the Big Bang is and all that kind of stuff, but let's just assume there was some sort of a Big Bang, that they even say back then everything was plasma, period. Every single thing. It was just nothing but a primordial soup of plasma. And then over time, the recombination happened, and the cooling down of the universe essentially allowed some things to form together. And when they formed together, they started making physical matter. Well, that kind of happened, but you can look at it this way. If we look at this through a more natural lens and not what we're taught in school. So say there was nothing but a sea of plasma at the very beginning. Plasma kind of goes in waves. It's not equally spread. There's densities. So you'll have a little more region over here that's a little denser than a region over here. So, okay, so when that happens, the plasma, which is electromagnetic, it starts to clump together, and it created these filaments. Filaments are like rivers. Like even in esoteric language, they talk about rivers of fire in the cosmos. And that's a very important part of how they see the cosmos. What is a river of fire? The river of fire is plasma. Plasma is literally smokeless fire. They talk about smokeless fire a lot in the old text. Smokeless fire. Look at the sun. The sun is a big ball of fire. Is there any smoke? No. It's literally smokeless fire. So in the beginning, there was just a big sea of plasma, and there are certain areas with more density than others, and then that would sort of accumulate, and it would create these filaments. And these filaments are like wiring, okay? So as the filaments stretched, because there's electromagnetism happening, so it's like pulling, you know, like how magnets do, you know? You have a negative and a positive, and it starts to pull together, and you have a positive and a positive, and it rejects. So these things start pushing and pulling and creating these filaments, these veins, these wires, you know? And those are the rivers of fire in the cosmos. And when this happens, every once in a while, they'll overlap, they'll intersect. You'll have one kind of river going this way, another one coming this way, and at that intersection point, they call it a Z-pinch. And at that Z-pinch point, it converges all of the energy. And all that energy like accumulates and creates this super duper dense, super hot, energetic, you know, like electromagnetic field, and eventually creates this fusion reaction, which gives birth to nebula. It gives birth to galaxies. It gives birth to stars. All of these things that happen in the universe that seem random, there's just a nebula over here, and there's a planet over here, and there's a star system over here, and there's a galaxy over here. They are in these filaments. If you were able to zoom out and see, which we can do with the like cosmic background radiation and that kind of stuff, you can see these filaments, like, and they'll show you how they parallel, as above, so below, which we'll get into more later. Like the cosmic background radiation of the universe parallels like the neuronal activity maps of the brain, because it's all very similar. So these intersection points, these Z-pinch points, where the plasma filaments connect and overlap, that's where it births. Like when you see these nebula, like the James Webb Telescope will show, and they're glowing and they're beautiful and they're big and everything. Well, that glow is plasma. Plasma is also the same stuff that's in, say, like a neon sign here on Earth. It's the aurora borealis, the northern lights. That's all plasma. The sun is plasma. It glows. It has light. So at these Z-pinch points where the filaments overlap, it gives rise to these structures. It creates, it births the nebula, and then the galaxies, and then the stars, and then everything else. And it does so by creating a lattice work, like a crystalline structure. They have been able to prove this. They went to the ISS, the International Space Station, and proved that plasma will self-organize into what they call plasma crystals. And it creates this pattern, this lattice work. It's like rebarb inside of concrete. It gives it structure and form. And on top of this, when plasma self-organizes like this and creates these plasma crystals, they behave in very intelligent ways. They move intelligently. They find and seek out other plasma, crystals. They behave intelligently, sentiently, and a lot of people think consciously, at least proto-consciously, saying that they are showing early signs of sentience and possible consciousness. Oof. Well, now we just took a turn here. So you're telling me that if you take plasma and introduce dust into it to give it some form, that it will self-organize and create structured lattice, which we call plasma crystals, that then create what's called a plasmoid, which is essentially a sovereign, independent, intelligent entity that shows signs of sentience and consciousness. That's wild, right? And that's exactly what I'm telling you, because that's exactly what we're seeing and proving in a lab. So on a cosmic scale, that same thing is happening and creating the nebula, which creates the galaxies, which creates the stars, which creates the planets. And you can see how this goes down, right? As above, so below. And we're proving all of this now. And it all starts with plasma, okay? So how do we get this physical matter like we have here? Well, we're in a bubble. There's something called a heliosphere. So essentially our star, our sun, shoots out solar wind. And that solar wind goes out very fast, continuously. It never stops, like a fan. And when it hits the plasma streams out in the greater universe, it creates this tension point, right? It's wind hitting a stream. So it's pushing this way and the stream's pushing this way, and it creates this tension, and that creates a boundary. Plasma can create these, what's called a plasmoid, which is a self-contained system. And inside of that system, it operates differently than outside of that system. So we essentially, our solar system is a gigantic cosmic plasmoid. And the boundary line is the heliosphere. They even sent out those Voyager probes, and when they crossed that sheath, which I don't know if they fully crossed, I think they might still be in the middle, but like all of their instruments started going haywire, and they said that basically on the outside of that little boundary line, like imagine we're in a cell and there's like a, kind of a membrane to the cell. On the other side of that, everything changed. Like things started going upside down and everything was going crazy. And they realized real quickly, I mean, the instrument panels are from like the 1980s, so they didn't get amazing data, but they were able to instantly tell that once the Voyager probes crossed through that boundary, that things changed dramatically, which means that the universe is far different on the other side of that line than it is on the inside. So that boundary line created this bubble. That's where we live, the solar system. It's a plasmoid, and inside that bubble, the physics and everything are far different, including the temperature. So it's far cooler inside this bubble, which allows the plasma to slow down, and it allows it to kind of freeze. Like I said earlier, it's frozen plasma, and it allows it to form atomic structures. So those free-flowing electrons that were stripped away from the nucleus can now sort of pick a place and location. They're no longer probability distribution fields. Now they have turned into atoms, and those form molecules and goes down the line. So we're essentially in a bubble, a plasma bubble within a plasma sea. But in this plasma bubble, we have different rule sets, different conditions, laws of physics that regulate and govern how everything works and operates inside this bubble. That's why I call this the simulator, not because it's a simulation, just because we have very defined rule sets and laws of physics, laws of nature, things like that in this world, this reality, that are far different than outside of it. And so whenever these scientists say that it's the fourth state of matter, it's because we're looking at everything from the inside out, right? This is what we know, obviously, so it's normal to have this human-centric point of view. So we just say, this is how matter is. And this is our understanding of the universe based on our understanding of physics, based on our understanding of the physical matter reality here. But that's actually the wrong way to look at it, because that's the exact opposite of how we should look at it. Because the universe does not operate the same way our physical atomic world operates, because the universe is 99.99% non-atomic. It's plasma. It'd be like standing on an island and saying that the entire ocean is exactly like this island, when you know damn well that that island is an anomaly. The ocean is far different than this world. The universe is far different than this world. That's just a quick primer on plasma and the hierarchy of plasma. And you can see how little we know about the greater universe, because we've spent most of our time just focused on this world here. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of what we should be doing. But now we're getting to this point where we've kind of maxed that out, and we're doing good. We have gadgets and doodads, and you know what I mean? Like we kind of have all the things that we need in this physical, matter reality. And now we're sort of starting to zoom out a little bit and say, okay, what else is out there? And as we peek out there, we're seeing some things that we didn't expect. We're seeing that it seems like the universe is largely unformed, and that there's a possibility that we form it just through our conscious observation, that it's just, like I said, it's a almost endless sea of unrealized potential energy. It's the clay that forms life. So what if, going back to the analogy that the whole universe is water and 0.01% of it is frozen water. It's ice sculptures. What if we could unfreeze it and reform it? Well, I think that you can. And I think that's what manifestation is. And there is a wild phenomenon that happened, especially in the late 1800s and early 1900s, with seances and ectoplasm. And I know this took a strange turn, but check this out. We got away from studying this, and I think we should get back into it. Or possibly they're studying it just not publicly. But a lot of famous mediums and channelers back in the early 1900s were doing seances where they would create ectoplasm and different things would happen. So for example, one of the famous ones, Harry Houdini, which at the time was the most famous magician in the world, was convinced that this lady was, a fraud. And he went to a couple of her seances to prove that she was a fraud. And he came out saying there was multiple phenomena that he could not explain. And this happened with a Nobel Prize winner who did the same thing, trying to disprove this, because this was all the rage at the time. And what was happening is these mediums, these women, would get into these trance states, and they would try to communicate with spirits that were past, disembodied spirits, and they would use their body, give their body up as a vessel for these spirits to communicate through. And they would sort of ooze, for lack of a better word, this white substance that would be able to turn into things, would be able to, when I say ooze, it's because it started coming out of them. And there's videos of this, pictures of this, not videos so much because a lot of this was early 1900s, but there are photos of this. The photos aren't the best because these are like dark settings, like seances and everything, but this was something that was studied and analyzed. And they were like kind of oozing this white substance that would take the form of, like, say, a hand. So say somebody was communicating with their past grandfather. Then all of a sudden this ectoplasm hand would form, and the person would feel the hand and touch the hand, and they would say that it like felt like it was like them talking to their grandfather. It was sort of consciously communicating to them. It had the same feeling and the vibes. It was a way for that disembodied spirit to literally sort of 3D print some physical matter for them to interact with from one dimension to the other. And I know this sounds completely insane, but if you think about it, if this world is just slowed down, frozen plasma, and plasma is a moldable, programmable, formable substance, then I can't find anything to say that you can't do this, like that you couldn't reform, possibly reprogram, and reuse. Like if you made a pot out of clay, and then one day you're like, oh, okay, I want to, turn this pot into a sculpture, you could melt down that clay and reform it. And it's possible that we can do that with our atomic physical matter reality here through using focused intention, concentration. These seances were like these hotbeds for electromagnetic activity. When you have a lot of people in one little area focused like this, it would, in a dark place, like it would create this environment where they could produce this ectoplasm, where they could reconstitute physical matter. And they would even say that it glows. And these were dark rooms, and the white kind of gel type material, it was like this, like almost like netting, and it would glow. And this is what the photos show, is it's glowing. And that makes sense because plasma glows, especially when it's activated with this electromagnetic fields. So just like I wanted to throw that in there because I think it's super duper interesting. And it kind of shows the potential for us to not necessarily reform our current world, because I like our current world, but possibly we could create things, out of plasma, especially off Earth, like maybe we can figure out how to program that clay, if it is just an unrealized, sea of potential energy, then I think as creators, as conscious beings, one of our jobs is to learn how to create. And it's the substance of creation. sort of brings back in the as above, so below. If plasma at a cosmic scale, at a macro scale, can come together and can create its own dust and can form a lattice and can self-organize and can consciously, sentiently, intelligently, form plasmoids and, split off and interact with other plasmoids and have this whole kind of self-created world out of plasma. Well, who's to say that since we are plasma beings, and everyone's a plasma being, and this is a plasma world inside of a plasma universe, that we couldn't figure out how to do the same thing? I think that that's very interesting, and I think that a lot of the phenomenon we see on Earth is in fact this. Whether it's us creating it or some other intelligence creating it, I think that we can create, in essence, something out of nothing, because we're not creating something out of nothing. It's no thing yet, but it's not nothing. It's plasma. It's unlimited potential. It's a blank canvas. It's clay ready to be molded. Back to the as above, so below, I talked about the filaments out in the cosmos and how these filaments are sort of the wiring, the neural network of our cosmos. And if we are inside the mind of God, which that's what the Hermetics and the ancient Gnostics and so many others really believe, this would sort of explain that, how we're inside of the mind of God. God would be the ultimate plasmoid source. It would be at the largest scale, and then inside of that, it would create these neural pathways, which are the filaments, and those would give rise to all sorts of plasmoids along the way. And then within those plasmoid bubbles, you have, it keeps going down. It keeps, scaling down to, smaller intelligent systems. Just like in our body, we have meridian points. The Earth has ley lines. Just like the plasma filaments that are in the cosmos, at their intersection points, they have more energy, and different things happen there, like births of nebula and stars. Well, on Earth, we have ley lines, well-documented ley lines, and at those intersection points of those ley lines, you have what? You have vortices. You have, spiritual centers, whether they're temples or shrines or just, megalithic structures. I mean, there's very amazing things that happen at those intersection points because the electromagnetism is different there. It's heightened. You have this concentration of energy at these ley lines on Earth and in your body at these meridian points. That's what acupuncture is. That's what tapping is. It's figuring out where these intersection points are and realizing that those intersection points are extremely important. It's kind of the Pareto's principle, the 80-20. Like those intersection points, those, even though they might only constitute 20% of your body or of the Earth or of the cosmos, they're going to actually account for about 80% of the effect. So we focus on those. We focus on the meridian points in the body, the ley lines on Earth, and these Z pinch points where the filaments, the plasma filaments in the cosmos overlap. So I teased at the very beginning that I think that I might have found a candidate for where the spirit world is. That's such an odd way to frame it, right? Where the spirit world is, as if it's a place that you can go. Well, maybe it is. Maybe it is. In the ancient times, they talked about these like the mystics and the shamans would talk about this foggy place outside of this physical realm, but not quite in the universe. It's always described as real close, like on the other side of the veil, right there. You can't quite see it, you can't quite touch it, but it's right there. And we know this because we can go there. I mean, at the Monroe Institute, we were trained specifically how to go to, what Robert Monroe calls the non-physical, but that is the spirit world. And Robert Monroe would also talk about when he was completely zoomed out in his full out-of-body state, and he's out, high up above Earth, and he's with his guides, and they're showing him the lay of the land, they would point out, he called it the M-band radiation field, but around Earth was this field, this hazy, illuminating field of energy and information. Well, that's super interesting because that's what the ancient mystics talked about too. This foggy, hazy, other side, in between realm. And Robert Monroe saw that same thing from a zoomed out point of view. Well, there's a guy named Robert Temple. He wrote a book called The New Science of Heaven, amazing book. It's all about plasma and the plasma universe. And in there, he talks about the Kordylewski clouds. Now, when I first heard about these Kordylewski clouds, I had a bell go off, sort of a subconscious bell that said, oop, put a pin in this. This is going to be super important. The more I heard him talk about it, and the more I read about it, and the more I researched it, I really think that if there is, for lack of better words, a physical location of the spirit world, this is it. So what is the Kordylewski clouds? There are these two gigantic plasma clouds in between the Earth and the Moon. They're at the two Lagrange points. There's these 2 points in space where the gravitational pull between the Earth and the Moon is null. It basically goes to 0, so you could just float there forever. That's where we put a lot of our satellites and stuff, because they don't have to try to stay in orbit. They don't have to, use any sort of energy. They're just stuck, like a magnet, because the gravitational pull from the Moon and the Earth sort of cancel each other out, and things are just static there. It's pretty neat. In space, you can just be stuck in space forever, right? You don't have to do anything. And at these 2 points, there are these gigantic clouds. Each one is like 10 times the size of Earth. And the clouds are not really visible by the naked eye, but they are detectable, and they've been able to detect them and measure them. They're gigantic. They're in between Earth and the Moon, and they are pure plasma. Now, why this is so exciting is because what we've learned about plasma is that it can be intelligent. It can hold information. So what it does is it structures information in its plasma crystal structure. So information, just like in the brain, just like in computer chips and stuff like that, is held in patterns, in sacred geometry. Things like this is how you actually hold and transmit information. It's not like written down in a book or anything. So these plasma clouds could literally hold information, like the Akashic records, like the Akashic field, like the cosmic database that I always talk about. This could be the source of the cosmic database, because if you have these gigantic clouds that are nothing but plasma, then they could literally be that in-between world. It's not out in the universe where things get completely non-physical. It is connected to Earth, tethered to Earth. It is where our information feeds up to. It is the hard drive for our information here. Like I talk about qualia, and the point of being alive is basically to create qualia, which is taking information, and then through our conscious experience, our free will decision making, we create what's called qualia, which is that subjective conscious data. So every time we make a decision to do something, we are taking information and creating an experience out of it. You have an experience. You have now packed that information with even more data. You've created a larger file out of it, and that file has to go somewhere. That conscious information has to go somewhere, and it feeds back up to the spirit world, and it starts to develop your soul file, and that's how you get your personality. That's how you get your soul, what Tom Campbell calls the individuated unit of consciousness. That's you, and you're on the cosmic desktop. What if that cosmic desktop, which is in the spirit world, is this Kordylewski cloud? And they talk about this, and ancient religions and stuff talk about these huge beings, these angels essentially, that are outside of the Earth, that are in between the Earth and the Moon. You can't help but think that these are these Kordylewski clouds that are vast storages of information, pure plasma, and we have these orbs that continuously come down to Earth. And these orbs have been described as plasmoids. And they seem to be rovers in a sense. They seem to be reconnaissance orbs. They seem to come down and observe when there's catastrophes and disasters and wars and stuff like that. They seem to help. Many people have been healed by these orbs. Many people communicate with them. I do. I call them ether dolphins because they swim through the air like a dolphin. They're consciously connected. You can connect to them consciously. You could say things like, if you hear me, flash, and they'll flash. I call them ether dolphins because we telepathically call them in the same way we call dolphins in. When we go paddleboarding with my friends and my wife, we'll call in. Dolphins are very telepathic. and you can just kind of go in a meditative state, and you can, kind of call them in. That's why when people go out and they go orb watching, sky watching, they'll say they're literally calling in the orbs. Other people say summon. I don't like that word. You say calling in, because you're telepathically communicating and just asking them, just communicating, just talking to them telepathically. So these orbs that seem to be orbs of plasma, that seem to be plasmoids, seem to be like stationed here on Earth, whether they're native, natural, entities, the same way like a butterfly would be native and natural here, or I'm starting to think that they are part of these Kordylewski clouds, and that it is how those clouds of plasma, which I really believe is our spirit world, interacts with this physical world. They are what we would call the cherubim or the angels. They are the messengers. They are, the things that come down here and observe and tell us to get our act together and try to convince us to stop things. They've deactivated nuclear weapons. They have, they show up at natural disasters. They used to harass the planes, back in the World War. They called them Foo Fighters. They know that this is a free will simulator, and that, they can't impede on our free will, that we're here to mess up things and make mistakes and learn and all that kind of stuff. But they definitely seem to be consciously aware of what we're doing, monitoring at all times, and almost as if they can step in and they have the last call if we hit that tipping point. If we do something that we really shouldn't do, that's going to have dramatic effects, that they can come in and say, hey, nope, we're putting into this. They seem to be the managers, the custodians, the tenders of the garden. They seem to be the cherubim from the Bible, the little bits of plasma that come down from the greater plasma cloud, which are called the Kordylewski clouds because he was the astrophysicist who found the clouds. But essentially, you could look at these two big plasma clouds as the spirit world. And there's a good chance that this is where the Akashic record is. This is where the information from all of our experiences, all the qualia that we're producing, all the subjective conscious experience that we produce constantly, day in, day out here, has to go somewhere. That information has to be stored somewhere. And that cosmic database, which I've always imagined in my head, was wrapped around Earth, the same way that Robert Monroe says that the M-band radiation field is this like band, like the rings around Saturn. It's like that around Earth. And this would perfectly fit with the Kordylewski clouds. And if plasma is, not saying plasma is conscious, but plasma seems to be the scaffolding and the fabric for conscious, for the consciousness to use, to, it's like the wiring, the information, the electricity goes along the wire, the same way consciousness goes along plasma. That these plasma filaments connect everything in the universe. That's why they say everything is connected, because it is. And even within the plasma filaments, which is concentrated plasma, within that, what we call empty space is not empty. There is plasma all through it. It's very scarce. It's not condensed because most of it is pulled to the filaments. But within those filaments, in between, what we call empty space is full of plasma. So all of space is full of plasma, and then you have these filaments. So the filaments are like the wiring, like the superhighway, of plasma. That's how everything is connected, because it's the scaffolding. It's the medium in which consciousness flows. And we are tethered to that. We are a part of that. We are plasma beings. And our memories, our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, all of our qualia, all of our subjective experience, all of our consciousness data is stored not inside of our body, but off planet. And not in the greater cosmos, because we're a closed system here. I think it's stored in those Kordylewski clouds. And I think that all of these plasma orbs that we see around Earth are a part of that system. Now, I hope you followed me along for all that, because this leads into my next emerging field of study. Because if plasma is the substrate, the blank canvas of unrealized potential energy, it is the scaffolding that consciousness uses to self-organize and to propagate and to stay connected throughout the entire universe, then where does the consciousness come from? What is the medium of consciousness? Well, in the next episode of Conscious Observers, that is what we're going to talk about, because I think I have found a candidate for the medium of consciousness. So if plasma is 99.9% of the observable universe, essentially it's 100% of the observable universe, because remember, that last 0.01% that they say isn't plasma is the atomic world, which is just frozen plasma. So if 100% of the physical universe is plasma, would you not be amazed to find out that there is something that constitutes 99.99% of the invisible universe, and we know what it is? And I think that it is the medium for consciousness. That, my friend, is the neutrino, which we'll talk about next week. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Please leave me a comment and let me know your thoughts on this. Please go check out the previous episode where I interviewed Dana Kipple. And please like and share and subscribe. I love you all. Thank you for being here and have a beautiful day.